Good morning. Buenos días. Thank you very much, Maya, for your introduction and for inviting me here. And thanks to all the organizers. I'm really happy to be here with you. So let's move to my presentation, and then hopefully we will have some time to talk about my work and the paper afterwards. I will also talk about my own performance practice, so you will have an idea what I'm doing, apart from the theoretical stuff. Let's start, okay? Okay, moving through mythical space is the title of the paper, Unknown Terrains and Site-Based Performance Practices. Human beings have always navigated life by creating myths in order to understand the cosmos and the meaning of life. Myth stories, songs have helped people to find their place in the world and orientate themselves in the wilderness. The myth-making or story-making process started when, quote, people became conscious of their morality, Karen Armstrong claims. They created some sort of counter-narrative that enabled them to come to terms with it. This way, they started like imagine that the quote, that the visible material world was not the only reality. Whilst their ability to imagine, create ideas, looking at life matters through different perspectives and invent stories, helped them make sense of the chaotic aspects of life and realizing that, quote, life had a meaning and value. Let's just go ahead to the next one. Mythology invites us to visit places that we have never been and experienced, that we have never thought of. As Armstrong puts it, myth is about the unknown. It is about it is about that for which initially we have no words. Geographical myths inspired by the unknown that lies beyond were created through movement and imagination. Mythical space, as opposed to the pragmatic and scientifically conceived space, is shaped through stories about what lies beyond the material world that meets the eye. The renowned human geographer Yi Fu Tuan, discussing mythical space, explains that mythical space can function, quote, as a component in a world view or cosmology. According to him, mythical space can be, quote, a conceptual extension of the familiar and workaday spaces given by direct experience. When we wonder what lies on the other side of the mountain, range, or ocean, our imagination constructs mythical geographies that may bear little or no relationship to reality. However, especially since 18th century, the scientific view of historical events, the expansion of the geographical knowledge through cartographic systems, and the development of technology have led to proliferation of information and spatial knowledge to the degree that unexplored terrains seem to not exist anymore. Both Tuan and Armstrong suggest that myths are less evident in modern times. As Armstrong claims, our modern alienation from myth is unprecedented. In the pre-modern world, mythology was indispensable. End of quote. Geographical space has been researched, measured, explained. Therefore, it can be claimed that there is a detailed and expanded knowledge about the pragmatic space as well as the way that we navigate it on the Earth. However, we should ask what kind of knowledge we have acquired, how this has been constructed and organized, what kind of knowledge defines a terrain as unknown. It seems that, as Armstrong claims, we are concerned above all with what actually happened, whereas in the pre-modern world, when people wrote about the past, they were more concerned about what an event meant. In his seminal book, The Perception of the Environment, Essays in Livelihood, Dwelling, and Skill, the anthropologist Tim Ingold says, our awareness of the environment is formed along the paths, unquote. Quote, it is not a view from up there rather than down here, but one taken along the multiple paths that make up a country and along which people come and go in a practical conduct of life. End of quote. Oops, sorry. Myths let us imagine ways that transcend everyday life and go beyond ordinary experiences. In a similar way, performance, and especially alternative performance practices, offer us new perspectives that alter or enrich our thought and lives, and invite us to experience another kind of space in which hope, action, and sharing are of great importance and value. Both in myth-making and performance-making processes, imagination and play become central elements which open up endless possibilities that can potentially transform us. Both myth and performance are not necessarily valuable for offering us unquestionable facts, rigid views, logic interpretations, and undisputable evidence. Rather, their significance is that they, quote, give us new insight into the deeper meaning of life. Different possibilities in creating imaginary worlds. Considering myth-making and performance-making, I would like to think of 5 key elements that are strongly linked to the creative process, which I'm going to consider later on the paper, as you can see also on the slide. So I'm kind of thinking about myth-making and performance-making and this aspect of process and imagination, cityscape, where these take place, collaboration, care, and the performativity of space. In 1947, John Wright, in his article Terra Incognitae, The Place of the Imagination in Geography, stated that nowadays geographers seldom or never have the opportunity to enter literal terra incognitae, totally unexplored territories. Scientific knowledge has been expanded, whilst advanced cartographic systems have pre-recorded every piece of the Earth on maps, diagrams, and tables. Therefore, it can be claimed that there is no territory that is unseen, which implies that the potential to discover new territories has diminished. However, we should consider what kind of knowledge we attained with devices of measuring and representing space, and re-examine and redefine the existence of unknown terrains. Quote, whether or not a particular area may be called unknown depends both on whose knowledge and on what kind of knowledge is taken into account, end of quote, as Wright points out. A traditional representation of maps and common rules that govern them does not give details of the urban space, environment, and its stories. It does not make us aware of the fine points and actions that alter and determine the urban environment. Even in a detailed version of a map, spatial stories and details of spatial elements and their uses cannot be discerned. There will be still areas that remain unknown to us. Thus, although the map feeds our knowledge, this is partial information, partial confirmation that there is no terra that is absolutely cognita. As Wright claims, if we look closely enough, if, in other words, the cartographical scale of our examination be sufficiently large, the entire Earth appears as an immersive patchwork of miniature terra incognitae. Even if an area were to be minutely mapped and studied by an army of microgeographers, much about its geography would always remain unknown. And hence, if there is no terra incognitae today in an absolute sense, so also no terra is absolutely cognita. End of quote. Visual representations of space in the form of maps entail specific codes, taxonomies, and ordering systems, following in particular organizational rationales and priorities, and promote specific values and purposes. Therefore, they are unavoidably selective. A map is a figurative representation of space and not space itself. The information given on a map could by no means substitute the experience of physically being in the space depicted, moving through the streets of a city, walking along its paths, observing, imagining, uncovering, give life to a silent map. We discover the area, its details, the surfaces, the textures, we put back on the map, spaces of dereliction, we imagine their stories, we create our own map. This process asserts what...
It's the other one.
Oh, sorry, it's the other one, yeah.
No, I mean the other button.
The other button.
You are using this one, and it's this
sorry.
one.
Oops.
No, you're still using the same one.
Oh,
It's this one.
This one, sorry, yeah. Great, thank you. This process asserts what Ingalls argues, we know as we go, not before we go. In her seminal book For Space, the feminist geographer Doreen Massey provides an essential theoretical framework in order to think of space as a source of creative action and disconnected from notions of stasis, closure, immobility, and being fixed and iron dialectical. She suggests that space has always been made and always, therefore, in a sense, unfinished. Her proposition offers a great potential for imagining and acting in space. For space to be unfinished and open, we need to think about it not as a container of predetermined actions and relations, but as a sphere that includes a heterogeneity of practices and processes. Therefore, space can be detached from concept of stasis and closure, and if we follow Massey's argument, the tendency of controlling space is contested, and the importance of spatial practices and counters is foregrounded. And although, as Massey observes, loose ends and ongoing stories are real challenges to cartography, these are the conditions that make space alive, dynamic, fluid, open to accidental discoveries. In the view of space as open and unfinished, yet to be made, free from codes and symbols that diminish its meaning, space produces and is produced by unplanned encounters and stories. The concept of the unfinished space requires a consideration of space beyond the static and well-defined systems. It's a space that produces and is produced by the unexpected, by multiplicity of trajectories. Space becomes a product of relations, social, political, and cultural, which include a variety of practices, concepts, histories, myths, and stories. If we think of space as a sphere that allows the coexistence of diversity, multiplicity, and plurality, then, as Massey suggests, we could imagine space as a simultaneity of stories so far. Before I move to the next section, which is I'm going to talk a little bit about the practice of walking and the way that performances altered our views on how space is produced. I would like to briefly discuss the meaning of and function of city spaces and architecture, and introduce the performativity of space, this idea of space performing. Besides, theatre affects the way that the urban environment is understood and experienced, and in effect produces the city itself, the theatre as a building and the theatre as a practice. As Harvey argues, quote, theatre is a part of urban process, producing urban experience, and thereby producing the city itself, end of quote. Performance spaces, whether these are theatre buildings or spaces temporarily used for performance events, are mainly situated in the urban environment. They are inhabited by people of the city, theatre workers, performers, and so on, and they are visited by people of the city, which is the audience. So let's move to talk a little bit about the cities. Cities can be seen as spaces in which diversity, tolerance, progressiveness, and inventiveness are welcomed. As Lauren Lees observes, quote, the city has long been celebrated as an emancipatory space in the social imaginary of the West, end of quote. Cities carry with them associations with democracy and people's empowerment that find their roots to antiquity. In her study, The Emancipatory City, Lees notes, the classical legacy is described into the very etymology of the word city, which comes from the Latin civitas, which meant the body of citizens rather than the place or settlement type where they were gathered, end of quote. However, city spaces are neither produced or nor used through gender-neutral practices. They can be spaces of control, alienation, inequalities, rigidness, discrimination, and fear. Spatial professionals such as urbanists, geographers, architects have attempted to untangle the complicated phenomena and processes occurring in city spaces, to explore the power relationships that urban space entails, as well as the possibilities for urban change. Cities cannot be easily contained within a definition, since they comprise the accumulation of people, buildings, relationships that find themselves in a constant change. Therefore, the analysis of city spaces become a rather multifaceted matter. As the geographers Steve Pyle and Nigel Thrift vividly explain in their imaginatively structured book, City A to Z, where the quote is from, if we know one thing about cities, then perhaps it is that they are too vast to be imagined in their entirety, and that is as a city. Nor can cities be understood as if they were only the sum of their parts. They are not the sum of roads plus buildings plus money plus people plus whatever. For cities are more than the inventory of things to be found in them, precisely because they are also about the social relations that constitute them. Cities are never static or complete, ready to be held frozen in some timeless encyclopedia of facts and fictions. Pyle and Thrift's assertion is in agreement with the claim of the urban geographer Tim Hall, quote, "The only consistent thing about cities is that they are always changing," end of quote. This means that people's needs and views are affected when alternations take place in city spaces and vice versa. Therefore, physical arrangements of the city, for example, may become redundant if they do not serve people's needs sooner than planners would expect. Or in other cases, new arrangements may be needed because of an increased demand of housing or open public space. Contemporary city planning has been affected by the range of issues that emerged from the industrialization of cities during the 19th and 20th century and their consequent de-industrialization. Problems such as the overcrowding of urban centers, which were not sufficient to serve the high number of population moving to cities, the lack of urban infrastructure, the demand for sanitization of the urban setting, required planning solutions that dictated architectural concepts and planning strategies that can still be evident in contemporary cities. The extended urban and social issues occurred in cities for the reason that factories and manufacturing business closed down, often resulted to the abandonment of buildings and the emergence of run-down areas within the city. The existence of derelict spaces and deserted areas in the urban environment is still a problematic issue in contemporary Western cities. How these are considered by planners determine the future of these sites to a great extent. Usually, the decaying sites are characterized as wastelands. They are no more than signs of waste which needed to be extinguished. And here I would like just to note that we will see some aspects of the meaning of dereliction through the examples that I will present later, and which, among other aspects, invites us to consider how the notion of performance can alter our conceptions about ruined spaces. In modern cities, many run-down areas of Western cities have been most liked sites for redevelopment. That's, for example, the district of Docklands in East London, and which I'm going to talk in one of the examples that I will present in a bit, has attracted the interest of development companies. The area's redesigning has resulted in a series of large-scale constructions with distinctive architectural styles, impressive megastructures. In his production of space, the French Marxist philosopher and sociologist Henri Lefebvre critiques spatial concepts and practices in order to analyze the role of space within Western capitalist societies, and he attempts to detach space from discourses that render it an abstract receptacle disconnected from everyday life and social practices. For Lefebvre, space is not merely the product of a mental and material processes, but also the medium of social relations. Social space is a social product. The production of physical space is not the exclusive privilege of spatial professionals, such as architects, planners, and designers, and neither is architecture an autonomous process that constructs a kind of urban sculpture. And I would like to think now...
Okay, no, on that one, it's
yes,
you're doing it...
Yes,
so,
I'm doing it all the time,
yeah.
sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit about the performative architecture, what this might mean. The architecture of built structures plays a significant part in the urban phenomena, since it can reproduce or challenge social roles and reinforce or discourage urban change. Usually, architecture is associated with permanent and solid structures. However, as Kifu Tuan suggests, there are cases where shelters have to be to be built and rebuilt in a short period of time, condensing in that way the idea of long-lasting architectural forms. Although space and time are interdependent and inseparable, architectural practice attempts to resist the flow of time and its impact on space. Usually, architecture tries to arrest time and its effects. The connection of architecture with time hints at a rather performative evaluation of architecture. Dorita Hanna, the commissioner of the architecture section in the Prague Quadrennial in 2011, opposes the conventional idea that architecture has always, the idea that architecture should and does disappear once the lights are lowered and the performance begins. She emphasizes that architecture has always a dynamic presence within a performance space and plays an active role in the production and reception of the performance. She says space is a performer that precedes action as action. And she gives a rather performative description of architecture. And as you can see on the quote on the screen, architecture is slow performance, heating up and cooling down, flexing and decaying, affected by fluctuations in light, temperature, and weather, accruing and shedding over time. Temporality is therefore key to recasting architecture as a performative entity. We need no longer regard architecture as fixed and timeless, but can now approach it as an assemblage of manifold spaces of and in time. The notions of performance and performativity have influenced many disciplines such as feminist philosophy, social sciences, and anthropology. Also, they have been used as conceptual tools for spatial disciplines such as cultural geography and critical human geography. The concept of performativity has been developed within the field of linguistics by John L. Austin, who established the difference between constative and performative utterances. In naming some utterances performative, Austin deferred to the ability of language to perform an action rather than merely describe it. There are different approaches to theorizing performance and performativity. In discussing social phenomena, Erving Goffman used the term performance in its fundamental meaning as a durational set of actions carried out by an individual and which takes place in front of others, the observers. However, as Dewsbury says, performativity is a slippery term. And although it's related to performance, quote, the performative slips across, beyond, and through performance interpretations. The performative is the gap, the rupture, the spacing that unfolds the next moment, allowing change to happen, end of quote. This metaphorical way of defining performativity allows us to think of the performativity of space as an unpredictable and unfixed milieu, which is always subjected to the possibilities of change. Space comes into existence through performance, the performance of people interacting with space and the performance of built spaces itself, within the city. The geographer Nigel Thrift has developed a non-representational theory, or theory of practices, as he calls it, influenced by writers as Walter Benjamin and Michael de Certeau, and also by the way that performance can be used as a metaphor in humanities and social theories. Thrift argues for an analysis which goes beyond representation and semiotic readings of space that has prevailed within geographical and social discourse and incorporates bodily practices and sensual experiences. His non-representation theory is not concerned with representation and meaning, but with the performative representations, showings, and manifestations of everyday life. The adoption of the notion of performance by other disciplines in humanities calls us to think the way in which performance contributes to new forms of knowledge. Thrift and Dewsbury suggest that performances, imaginative practices can offer to geography new methods, whilst, quote, performance allows us to treat space as an active operator rather than a passive sign standing for something else, End of quote. The performativity of space suggests that its meaning is precisely unfixed and unfinished. It is dependent on human action and on time processes. Looking at space through performance opens a fertile ground where questions about space and its meaning can be studied. Architecture becomes performative, not merely an object, and an object that derives from professionals' expertise. It is an ongoing time-based process. It is a manifestation of junction points of urban stories that derive from spatial professionals, inhabitants, and users. As the editors of The Unknown City-State, architecture is ambient, atmospheric, and architecture is ambient and atmospheric, and architecture allows us to tell stories. It is both backdrop to and inspiration for theoretical and poetic musings of all kinds, from love to philosophy, theology to Marxism. End of quote. I would suggest that architecture not only inspires stories, but it's also about the product of those stories. And now I will go to one of the main spatial practices that I would like to talk about, which is walking. Walking as a mode of travel, but also as a spatial practice encourages creative responses to urban space and generates critical reflection. Through its rhythmic movement, walking generates a kind of...
The other one.
Yeah, sorry. Just want to go back to see, sorry, because I had one more, last. Yeah, great. Generates a kind of rhythm of thinking, as Rebecca Solnit puts it. The walker absorbs, translates, imagines, and transforms the multiple stimuli of the environment. He reflects on space by being in it. Walking and thinking come in tune and support the walker's participation in a creative practice. As Jane Rendell observes, quote, "Where I am makes a difference to who I can be and what I know," end of quote. She defines the tendency of recent theoretical discourses to employ spatial terms such as mapping, locating, situating, positioning, and boundaries for analyzing, quote, "new ways of knowing and being." Through walking, we reposition ourselves within the cityscape. We experience city spaces through various perspectives by being immersed in them. When we deepen our connection with, we deepen our connection and comprehension of the physical space. The British anthropologist Tim Ingold explains that the experience of an object from many perspectives affects our knowledge and takes part in the process of our understanding. He says, "To perceive a thing from different angles, it is supposed that we might turn it around in our hands or perform an equivalent computational operation in our minds. But in real life, for the most part, we do not perceive things from a single vantage point, but rather by walking around them." End of quote. However, paths and streets are rendered to be merely connectors. They serve to connect destinations, not spaces that offer experience in themselves, especially in big urban spaces, urban cities, mega cities. According to Ingold, connectors are associated with transport, the main difference of which from wayfaring is that transport is destination-oriented. Thus, quote, "While on the trail, the wayfarer is always somewhere, yet everywhere somewhere is on the way to somewhere else." End of quote. The transported traveler, quote, "who departs from one location and arrives at another, is in between nowhere at all." End of quote. In this case, the streets cease to be space of wandering and exploration. They principally become means that facilitate the conveyance of people and goods and fail to grow organically within the city's net. Besides, if we consider that straight lines have been praised by modern architecture, while meandering lines have been perceived as a threat to order, authority, linear process, the prominent architect Le Corbusier celebrated the straight line and the right angle, while he rejected the curve as being ruinous and dangerous. And he says, for example, quote, "Man walks in a straight line because he has a goal, and knows where he's going. He has made up his mind to reach some particular place and he goes straight to it. End of quote. The connection between straightness, reason, goal is clear to Le Corbusier's statement. Walking in straight lines from point to point, avoiding deviation, hesitation, distractions, intuition shapes the city's user's experience within a destination-oriented path. However, I would suggest that cities still contain possibilities for wandering, exploring, and creating, especially through performance practices. Despite the increasing effort of regulating all possible routes, walking remains an act dependent on the idiosyncratic movements of the individual that contest the city spaces as imagined and materialized by urban planners and architects. So for de Certeau, in his seminal book, The Practice of Everyday Life, walking defines walking as a space of enunciation that is performed by urban pedestrians. If we follow de Certeau and his argument, we start thinking of walking as an act of creation, an act of poiesis, of making. The walker produces new ways of making the city through the gaps that emerge from the city's net, deviating from established routes, conventional rules, and dominated systems of production. Walking invites new possibilities of experiencing and reshaping the built environment and speaks something of the city. Now, let's see a little bit about performance and walking. Performance walks suggest ways of experiencing city streets, of listening to their hidden stories along the route. An early kind of performance walk was employed by Situationist International. You saw the map just a few slides before. Probably you are quite familiar with that, yeah, just to have it in front of us. An early kind of was employed by Situations International, formed by a European avant-garde revolutionary group of artists, writers, poets in 1957, who sought through their playful interventions and manifestations to resist the new urbanism and the society in which consumption and alienation were evident. The political and social dimensions were clear in the Situationist International radical practices, which aimed to transform the urban space and to reinstate lived space as the true map of the city, to discover and define the meaning of the city's labyrinth, to reveal the collision between poetry and its opposite. And I'll just go back to the, sorry for this. Oops, sorry. Okay, let's leave it here. Okay. Walking has attracted the attention of many artists as a way of exploring the relationship of performance and art with physical space, from Bruce Nauman video performance walking in an exaggerated manner around the perimeter of a square, to the landscape creations of Richard Long, and from Fiona Templeton's You, the City, and Rights and Sights, Emmy's Guide to Anywhere, to Teichin Sheikh 1 year performance 1981-82. Walking has been epitomized as a human physical action which at the same time carries artistic, political, and social dimensions. And here we see a performance created by Station House Opera where the audience could take these concrete blocks and they would build it around the city and above the structures or around the objects, wherever in the buildings as well, and they would start pushing one of the bricks, and then the whole domino effect went all around the city. But I would like here briefly to mention the site-specific company Rights and Sights, comprising Kathy Turner, Stephen Hodge, Simon Barsichetti, and Phil Smith, who have created a number of site-specific misguided walks, as they call them, and misguided books. Their books usually comprise a series of stimuli for actions, imaginative suggestions and provocations that can take place in city spaces. The company is interested in mythogeography, as Kathy Turner explains by this term. They mean, quote, to imply not only the individual's experience of space, but the shared mythologies of space that are also part of its significance, end of quote. And he continues that our guidebook places the personal, fictional, and mythical on an equal footing with factual municipal history, end of quote. From a performative perspective, the performance walk is a way of experiencing and understanding the city, but it's also a way to change the city. The audience participant rediscovers and remakes the city through the otherwise everyday activity of walking. They appropriate and alter space, creating, as I argue, its own architecture. And now I would like to present two examples of alternative performances that can be characterized as site-specific or site-based or immersive performances. But before, just give me 1 second. Before that, I'll just give a short idea that, of what site-specific performance might be. So in the 20th century, theorists and practitioners of theater, they moved away from the traditional theater configuration, and non-theater spaces were employed and offered hospitality to performances by being partially or totally converted. The fact that since the second half of the last century, many performances have taken place in non-theater spaces, such as warehouses, cafes, streets, train station houses, has provoked changes in theater practice and codes, but also in the way that urban space is considered and experienced. The building that hosts a performance provides a meeting point for audience and performer. It affects the style, rhythm, and often the theme of the performance and the performance-making process, whilst it also shakes ideas about the theater structures and conventions, stage, auditorium, training methods, performance events, means and missions. So I would like to talk about these two cases of site-specific performances. So here we have a performance which was called Faust, and was created by Panstrang Theatre Company, that took place in the neglected 21 Wapping Lane building in East London in 2006-2007. The disused warehouse located within the London Docklands complex was used for the performance. The brick four-story warehouse chosen for the production was not a theatre landmark and was not even located within a known theatre district in London. The site was protected from any intrusions of visitors by railings, as you can see on the, okay, maybe you can see it better here. This is the entrance, the image at the bottom, you can see the entrance. A tall brick wall and barbed wire, and was not open to the public. However, it attracted a large audience. It was sold out for the whole period, this performance. A large audience when Faust took place, and its spaces and the real estate contributed to the creation of an unusual experience for the theatre audiences, which were used more in convention to attend a performance like this in a conventional theatre. The building was demolished in 2010, where new ambitious constructions of luxury residential apartments were built. It's worth noting that the development plans were proposed by a company which is part of the Bellymore Properties, which sponsored Faust. So there's a big discussion, who sponsor arts and what's the implication of that. The theatre event made the neglected building perform or be inhabited again, which opens up a discussion about the function of the relic spaces in the city. So it puts a question on, it puts under question the way that we discuss sites as useless or wastelands. The imaginative use of neglected sites is a practical manifestation of giving space a chance, the chance to open to possibilities and to multiple ways of experiencing it. And so the audience had to enter the building, and they could move all around, sorry, maybe you can see here, move all around the building where different installations within the rooms were installed. And as you were going around wearing this mask, as you can see on the bottom right, the audience was wearing this kind of mask, and they had to move and wander around the 4-story building, and they could encounter different scenes or different scenographical places. So sometimes you could see an action, sometimes not, but you could be absorbed by the atmosphere of the performance. And you could go in any direction. You could go up or down on the building as you wish. So it was your own. It was up to the audience to select the route that they could follow in the building. So now, briefly, I would like to discuss a little bit another performance practice, which is it takes place close to the area that we are discussing now, and it's called warping audio. The project Warping Audio was In order to attend the Warping Audio, the participant had to download the instructions from the audio file from the internet website and to take it to a portable audio player and choose the day and time he wants to go for a walk and to experience the performance. The location, duration, and narrative has been chosen by the artists Matthew Ball, Katie Day, Elisa Livergrant. The project was funded by Arts Council of England and launched in 2005. The recording starts with a smooth breathing reminiscence of the sound of soft waves. The narrator's voice is reassuring. She is an inhabitant of the neighborhood for many years, and her confident and persuasive way of talking gives you confidence that she can lead you securely through the walk. For 40 minutes, she guides you around the streets of Wapping and shares with you her story of living in the area, her memories as well as her present. So the narrator invites you to a garden, the River Thames, a park, a cemetery, a Wapping's canal. She remembers her dead man, a man with whom she fell in love once and who sailed away, the airplanes flying in the sky during the war, and the happy moments in her schoolyard from which the only remnant is a pillar which is hardly visible because of wild plants growing around it. Signs of dereliction and abandonment in the building's environment indicate that the disappearance of previous activity in the area. The built environment, its present condition and use, and the signs of its past history become part of the work. Small details of built structures, fragments of the past use, and the transformation of the area have been imprinted on the materiality of space, bringing past, present, and future together. The participant finds themselves in different spaces and times at once. The narrator's memories, his stories, and descriptions make them imagine the past, which intersects with the reality evident in the area. They find themselves in between past and present, imagine an existent space. Sounds from the recording unifying with the sounds of the physical space, and imaginary people becoming from the narration stand where people pass by. Fictional situations take place within the reality of space and give diverse meaning to the city. So just to say that this route, as you can see, is quite central in London. You can see the picture on the right-hand side on the top, where the city of London is based. So it's in between the city of London and Canary Wharf, but it's a relatively hidden area. And has been buried among the skyscrapers raised to the west and east side of this area. However, the area's vacant lands and its derelict sites, combined with its centrality, have attracted new investment. And as we saw, the walk ends opposite the 21 Wapping Lanes building, as we see before, the one that we saw before, and which the demolition of the warehouse and the build of big residential structures have been completed and have, of course, transformed the area. The performance walk has attracted the interest of many artists in performance studies, and they call from different engagement and different interaction with the audience. I would like now, just briefly, if there is a bit of time, just to mention a little bit of our practical work, if that's for the next 5 minutes. So I'm working as I mentioned at the beginning with a group of people, which is we call it Part Suspended One Word. I'm not going to, sorry, I'm just going to go briefly. So here are some of the projects that we have done since 2006 when we started working together. And I just want to show you this briefly to show you how we have worked with different spaces. Here we have worked with tents within the gallery, so these were one-to-one performances. Each tent had a performance, and the audience could go within the tent and experience, you know, the performance that was created, was devised by the performer. Here is another performance which took place at Tate Modern, curated by Antigone Passidi in 2018. It was based on refugees' testimonies, and it was a part of part of the propositions for change at Tate Modern. And this was created as soon as the UK left European Union, so it was a response to Brexit. So I'm just mentioning that in the sense that we are all there is always in our minds what the organization of space and what this means for us, for the stories that we have to say, what is the function of borders, what is the function of this way of organizing space, economically, politically, socially. This was another performance based again on refugees' testimonies and imaginative stories, which was presented in Athens in 2006. There was a big explosion of refugee waves back in 2016, and now thinking about the war that happened, both of the wars that happened in our close neighborhood, let's say, we should think what is the function of space and how people live there, or what it means to be a refugee. I find that quite current. Again, it comes again to my head what this might mean, what the impact of all this might be. This is another playful intervention that we did it outside the British National Theatre and at the Prague Quadrennial Performance Space and Design. And this is a little action where, like the Sisyphus, we go up and down in different parts of the building, and we pour these buckets of rice from one pot to the other. And this is where we did it. Yeah. And this is again, working with this idea of time and space, and how this we wanted somehow to visualize a clock, if it makes sense, how you can go at a specific time at a specific place and do this action, and what this means. And this is, it's a project about women. I'm not going to talk about this right now, but I want to say a couple of things about Spirals. And Spirals is an ongoing project that we have worked since 2013. It's a poetic journey that crosses geographical borders and unites female voices in an exchange of languages, cultures, personal narratives, and modes of expression. Through the symbol of a spiral, the project explores threshold, migration path, nature, home, and sense of belonging. The spirals acts as a sign of becoming, transforming, and awareness. So in this project, we collaborated with female poets. We created recorded material. We created soundscapes, and a series of performances and video work that took place in different places in different cities. The cities were chosen where the places of the filming were the ones where poets were lived, either temporarily or the moment when we were filming, or from where they are from, actually. So we had had a video poem which was called Genesis and was made by Noelia Diaz-Vicedo in London 2017. We have, just because I don't want to forget the name, so I will go back to my writing. So we have, in 2018, Beatrice Bayol's poetry, Tracks for Finding Home. Then we have the action that happened in Broadstairs. Some poems from Spiral, from 28 Paths of Hair is there. Then we worked with Irini Margariti, and we filmed that in a ruined space in the center of Athens. Barbara Bridges' poems were employed for filming Spirals as If in the ruins of Coventry Cathedral in the UK. And we have also the poems, the Belgrade poet Anna Rodic, who produced the project, who produced the Spirals auto-portrait. This is how she calls the name of the video poem. So these are some of the spaces that we have worked with. So the performance reflecting on the poems, which have been selected for the projects, chose material that were associated to images, words, feelings of the poem, and at the same time were inspired by the location: flowers, soil, chalk, corn, oranges, beans, flour. Sorry, yes, here you can see some of the, up. So you can see some images of stills from the poems. So we, flour, soil, chalk, corn, oranges, beans, flour, ice, cubes, glasses, feathers, and etc. And they were used to build these spiraling paths by the performers. Through the performative gesture of making and walking along spirals, we created a transitory architecture of personal paths made by the female creators. The project reconnected city spaces, poetry, with poetry and imagination. It produced a shared space by creating a network of women across European cities and beyond, and challenged the preconceptions of what, in regards to socio-political and geographical borders and the use of space. Here I have a short video. Maybe you can go online and watch it, because I think it's, we don't have time. It's, yeah. And then, sorry. How do we go? And here you can see some of the actions that we did. We ran public workshops, workshops open to the public, so the public and could play with this idea of the symbol of the spiral. And these are performances that took places in different buildings and galleries. Yeah, here you can see the idea of the people playing with the spiral, and this is something that we started doing after during the COVID. So we worked online with this group of artists: Barbara Bridget, Georgia Kalogeropoulou, Noelia Diaz-Vicedo, and we invited as well more artists to contribute to the project. And we have created a series of poems, of video poems, based on this idea. Here you can see some of the creative writing that we have done during the COVID, and this was based on our dreams. Okay, and I would like just to finish. Yeah, this is it's coming from an India collaborator
who filmed a project based on the instructions that we have given to the artists. You can find this online, and this is some of the work that other artists have contributed. Okay, and maybe I will finish it. Oops, sorry. So okay, just to conclude. So in this paper, I have sought to untangle aspects of spatial relationships that play a significant role in the production of meaning and the process of generating knowledge, not only in the performance realm, but also in the built environment. And I would like to emphasize the value of searching for unknown terrains through performative gestures, that site-based performances, and the need to acknowledge our personal involvement in the production of space and in spatial histories. I suggest that the act of imagination is an act of resistance, since it can fight against the immovable, slow change and concreteness of built materials, and looks for the transient and the ephemeral. That's it. Thank you, and sorry for keeping you. For running